World Congress. I know there were many that were looking for something that is attached to Assyriology, and I think this is the surviving remnant today. So welcome. The field, the Bible and its world, and we're going to have several lectures on Assyriology and Assyria and the Bible. I think that since some of the people who are going to be talking, including the chair himself, were students of the scholar in Assyriology, Professor Chaim Tadmor, we could have called this session Assyria. I'd like to, the first gentleman, thank you. The first gentleman I'd like to announce, will give the first lecture, is Professor Aren Maeir, Professor of Archaeology at Bar Ilan University, Director of the Tel Safi Gat Archaeological Project, and the present expert in lighting bonfires on the that have still not been seen at Azeka. Aren, b'kasha.
How much time do I have?
I don't know. 20 minutes.
20 minutes. Okay, great. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah. You hear me now? Okay. Now I just have to see my lecture. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very, very pleased that we managed to put together this session and that I can present in it. And I'm in this session going to try to talk about something very, very simple. And I would say it's old-fashioned research is good. And it's time to stick to that. The Assyrians in the West. This is one of the I would say, the best documented periods and phenomena that we have in the ancient world. It's well known from a wide variety of documentary sources, whether biblical, extra-biblical, a wide range of archaeological remains. It's extraordinarily important, as anybody knows who's dealt with the Iron Age too, for the history and understanding the culture of ancient Israel. And I would say in general, I mean, if you look at the pre-classical periods in the ancient Near East, this is perhaps one of the best known periods that we have. And a lot has been written about this, and a lot of the impetus of early biblical research, early biblical ancient Near East studies, lies within the realm of Assyriology and the New Assyrian Empire and its impact on the Levant. And every once in a while, we get a flourishing of new ideas that hit the research. And let's start with this. Original thinking is important. It moves ahead our field. And when you have things that challenge previous conceptions, it's important for us. But new theories have to be based on an in-depth knowledge of the relevant data. And recently, we've seen a bunch of new theories that have come out relating to the Neo-Assyrian impact in the West. And some are new ideas which deal with the available data with new interpretations, but still within the realm of the what's known. And others, and I'll be focusing on a specific one, go into sort of like this zone in which a new theory is propounded with no relationship to an in-depth knowledge of the Assyriological and the archaeological data, to produce something which is very nice if you don't know anything about Iron Age history and culture, but otherwise it's unacceptable. Now, I want to bring a few examples of some of the new ideas that have come out, which are within the parameters of what you can debate. And for example, well-known discussion over who's responsible for the large Iron Age olive oil production facilities that we see at Ekron in the late Iron Age. The excavators led by Sai Gittin suggested that it's to be connected to the Neo-Assyrian Empire, and in more recent years, a debate has developed between Sai Gittin and Larry Steger and Nadav Ne'eman and a couple of others, of whether perhaps the Egyptians are those who are in fact in charge of this and the cause of it in the late 7th rather than the early part of the 7th century. Another example is various scholars who want to stress the important impact that the Egyptians of the Saite period have in the southern Levant in the 7th century, and various people have connected things going on at Ashkelon, Mitzad Cheshavyau, Ekron, and other things in relation to this aspect. And another more recent example is also the discussion of the Ramat Rachel Palace, who Nadav Ne'eman, and then for a while also Oded Lifshitz suggested that the Ramat Rachel Palace is not a Judite palace, but rather an Assyrian palace. And subsequent to his excavations, Oded Lifshitz changes a little and suggested that it's a Judite palace, but it's built under the auspices and under the influence of the various imperial powers throughout the various periods, Assyrian, Babylonian, Persian, Hellenistic, as sort of like a place where materials are brought and then sent out to the various imperial powers. Now, these are all examples of theories which we can debate, and we can agree and we cannot agree, but they're within the parameters of the material evidence that we have and the historical evidence. What I'm going to discuss extensively is this article by Avi Faust, which appeared in Jesho 2 years ago, in which Avi brings forth a completely new understanding, in his opinion, of the interests of the Assyrian Empire in the West, and tries to turn the whole thing upside down and suggest a completely new vision. Now, so you can say, what do I care? Why should I spend a lecture, 20 minutes, and 20 minutes of your precious time talking about an article which I don't agree with? A couple of reasons. First of all, I think methodologically, an article, a study, which professes a new theory, questioning of the consensus, but ignores a large body of data, is problematic. This is from someone who's a prolific and original thinking scholar who has made important contributions to the field and has a broad influence in the field. This, I think, is something that should serve as a warning light that you have to make careful that original ideas don't foreshadow careful and thorough research. And finally, 2 points. If something like this gets through in a prestigious journal, something's wrong with the process that we're going through. And third, and finally, I've spent 17 of the 17 last years of my life dealing with Philistia, studying Philistia from every single aspect that I can, multidisciplinary, trying to move ahead things in a way that we relate this to up-to-date research. And what we see here, in my opinion, is an enormous step backwards in our understanding. Now, I'm going to go one by one and discuss them. Let's start with a review of his claims. Faust claims that olive oil production was known in the Iron Tube before 7th century Ekron in large scales, only at some sites in the Israelite Northern Kingdom, and this we can see there, ending with the destruction of Samaria. Only later, come sit down. Only later do we see large-scale olive production in Judah and Philistia. Another important point, the shvela is inappropriate for olive oil production, that you can't grow olives in an extensive manner in this region, and thus there would not be a tradition of the production of olive oil in any manner, significant manner in the shvela, unless there was absolutely no other option. And when it does develop in the south, this is only after the collapse of the northern industry, and perhaps also with the help of experts who escaped from the kingdom with the destruction of Samaria and had to find a place to bring their expertise. Going on. This is already wider. According to Faust, Assyrians were not interested in expanding the economy of conquered regions. Rather, they simply wished to suck them dry of their wealth and of their prestige items. He claims one cannot view the Assyrian demand for tribute and taxes as an incentive to expand the economies of conquered regions, or in his words, but viewing this as an incentive to the economy is a dubious perspective. This is like comparing Assyria to a bully who comes to prospering stores demanding protection money. The large sums this bully takes forces the owners to work harder in order to be still profitable and to maintain their standard of living, and it is possible as a result that they will have to look for new customers. But can we credit the bully for the development of the economy? Another claim, Assyrians behaved in conquered regions in a manner similar to the Babylonians, basically a scorched earth policy. Philistia, another thing, Philistia and Phoenicia were not annexed to and did not become provinces of the Assyrian Empire. In Faust's words, they, and I'm saying they being the Assyrians, did not waste time, money, and effort in order to maximize their profit and did not invest in their conquered regions. And the economic development of both Philistia and Phoenicia were aimed at the west, towards the Mediterranean, as an independent venture, not depending on or forced upon by the Assyrian Empire. And in the bottom line, and to summarize it, prosperity in the southern Levant was always outside of the borders of the Assyrian Empire. And whenever a new prospering region was conquered, prosperity ceased. In some cases, it moved farther away, but it always remained outside the empire's border. The economies of Phoenicia, Philistia, and Judah prospered during the 7th century BCE, not due to Assyria, but in spite of it. And that's his summary. The question is, does this hold water? And I'm going to demonstrate, and I'm not going to take all the points, I'm going to demonstrate a bunch of them that one by one, when you examine central facets of his argument, they simply don't fit in. And most unfortunately, this is due to a large body of research that we know of. I'm going to focus mainly on the archaeological data, but also on a bit on the textual. Mass production in Israel. The sites that he quotes are surveyed or partially excavated sites, and none of the such data exists from the major sites in the Northern Kingdom. The dating of these sites is unclear because it's from survey. It's not, we can't say for sure exactly when they are. We can't say for sure that they're simultaneously. And there is no other evidence in any manner that the Northern Kingdom played a major role in interregional trade, let alone in olive oil. So this is not a major producer of olive oil that is exporting out quantities of olive oil and other products to the late Iron Age world. And some of the sites that Faust notes as Iron Age production may have belonged to other polities, such as Rosh Zayit, Shikmona, Tel Hadid, may not be relevant for the discussion as a whole. Now, as far as olive crops and the production of olive oil have been known in the Shfela and in the coastal plain from prehistoric times onwards. Olive production is known in the Philistia and the Shfela from way before the 7th century. We have examples from Tel Asafi at the 11th and 10th century, similar at nearby Tel Harasim. We see it again in the 9th century at Tel Asafi, and at Tel Birt Misim and Bet Shemesh in the 8th century, we see it as well. There's no reason to assume that only after 722 did this knowledge percolate to the south. The only thing we can say is that in the 7th century, for some reason, Ekron expanded this phenomenon. And here's examples of a 10th or 11th century olive oil production facility at Tel Asafi. We have at least 2, if not 3 others at the site. There's other comparable ones at other sites. And here's a 9th century olive oil installation from our WazanaL destruction level. We see at least another one on surface on another part of the site. And add to this, we have enormous amounts of vessels with what seems to be olive oil residue throughout the Iron Age at Tel Asafi. Now, was Assyria invested in evolving Philistia? From the second half of the 8th century, and most of you know this, Assyrian military campaigns to Philistia and subsequently to Egypt. And then their actual physical presence in Philistia is without question. The campaigns in the 8th century, I'm not even going to read them out. We all know them. In the 7th century, we all know them. There's no reason to assume that there's no Assyrian involvement, intensive and ongoing. We know of many, many sites in which there's direct and unambiguous evidence of the Assyrian presence. And this includes not only objects which are traded, but we have architecture, texts, and other aspects which tell us clearly that there's a physical presence of Assyrians in Philistia and in Phoenicia. We'll get to that in a moment. Just mentioning Gezer, Hadid, a palace at Ashdod West recently, Tel Jemmeh, where there's clear evidence of a caravan city, and we can see this from the zooarchaeological remains, that this is a city where materials are taken from the Arabia, brought to Jemmeh, and passed out westwards. These are areas which are under the control of the Assyrians. This is not something done from afar without any intense involvement. And of course, the numerous fortresses that have been reported in Philistia and the northwest Negev at this time. And here are just examples of some of the finds. The Rishon LeZion fort, found not too long ago, the Ashdod West Palace, the Tel Jemmeh Assyrian architecture, which all of us know, the Tel Serer bronze, a Tel Hadid Assyrian text. It talks without, it shouts rather. And again, what was the level of Assyrian control in Phoenicia? Avi Faust claims that they weren't involved. They didn't turn it into. We know for a fact that portions of Phoenicia, both in the north and the south, were turned into Assyrian provinces. The other parts were over strict Assyrian overlordship. They founded a Karum there. It simply cannot be argued. Several campaigns to Phoenicia. Again, I'm not going to even mention them. And we know from, for example, Esarhaddon's treaty with Baal, that the Assyrians demand access to the Philistine coast, and they have a clear control of what is going on there. You can't talk about lack of involvement. And I think, can you claim a lack? Clearly not. If anything, as we go along with time, this involvement only becomes more and more intense, more and more involved, more and more something that is a very, very specific part of the Assyrian plan, and this is to control trade and to control and open the path to Egypt. Now, what about the documentary evidence? We have extraordinary large amounts of documentary evidence of many genres, from public, royal, private, etc., which relate to the southern Levant and can be used in comparison when we look at other regions under Assyrian control. To make a claim that that was made in that article is simply ignoring this data. You can't do this based on a gut feeling and a nice idea. We have comparisons from other regions. For example, the work done in Anatolia by Parker and others, which give us a very good parallel to what's going on in Levant. And anybody who has dealt with the Assyrian Empire and comparing it to the Babylonian Empire knows that these are two different creatures. They act differently, they have different policy. To say that Mesopotamian empires acted the same is like to say European empires, such as the Bonaparte and Hitler, had a similar policy. It's ludicrous. Summary. No justification to remove the Assyrians from the economic and geopolitical picture of late Philistia and Phoenicia. Massive Assyrian political, military, and economic involvement is without a doubt. While you can argue, for example, who caused the Ekron industry, that still does not remove the Assyrians from the West. There's no evidence of Northern Israelite Kingdom was a major producer and exporter of olive oil. And perhaps this might be seen as an attempt to give the Israelite Kingdom a bask of glory at its what it was or was not. And the Assyrians did not systematically destroy all regions which they captured. Some were extensively utilized for economic and strategic reasons. Others were clearly utilized for the economic and strategic benefits. And one cannot simply brush off the ongoing Assyrian imperial grand strategy, if we use Luttwak's term from other periods. There was a clear method in which they were doing here. It has an impact in the archaeology. It has an impact on the text. And I'm sorry, although I do like new ideas, this one has passed. Thank you very much.
I want to thank Aren for this devastating lecture. It's open now. Please, Avi. Avi.
Yes.
Yes. The summary, I didn't see
Could you speak loud?
There's one point that I wonder if you agree with it, because I didn't see it mentioned in your summary. And this is that the Assyrians did not develop the region economically anyway, but just took what they can and that's it.
Again, I didn't hear the question.
Assyria didn't develop the economy. Assyria didn't develop the economy.
Well, they may not have developed it, but the fact that they were there and the fact that there was pressure and the fact that they were on spot, it's not, it's, the theory that Avi is professing is he's saying that the Philistines and the Phoenicians basically ignored the Assyrians and developed it westwards, that the entire development of Philistia and Phoenicia is westward oriented towards the trade in the Mediterranean. And that it's no connection to what the Assyrians are being there. And the fact that the Assyrians are breathing down these people's necks, they're their neighbors, they're taking taxes, they're campaigning, etc. It doesn't make sense. They may not be the people actually building the olive oil presses in Ekron, but they're the people behind it.
So you do think it enlarged the economical product of the region, the Assyrian presence?
Avi, we have exactly 2 or 3 more minutes, so you'll continue afterwards. Israel,
I'm not entering into the
Yeah.
archaeological debate. It's not my field. But just looking on the blessings to the tribes, both in the end of Genesis and Deuteronomy, where you have the system of 12 tribes, which in my view is not significant after the Assyrian conquest of the north. So it should be dated, in my view, before it. And when you look for oil in both places, it's in the tribe of Asher, which in my view can support the idea that there was a massive production of oil in North Galilee prior to the Assyrian conquest.
I have no doubt. The central hills in Galilee are a place which are naturally very, very good for raising olives. And from the beginning of time, there's intense olive oil production in these regions. But does that mean that the Israelite kingdom was a major producer and exporter of olive oil, and that in the south it could only be done once the Israelite kingdom fell?
I would not.
That's all I'm saying. I have no argument that that they are producers of olive oil. Yeah.
Any other comments? Then, Aren, I just want to make one minor comment, and I'm sure that you know about it. When you were going over the list and you mentioned about the Karum, which is an emporium and a tax center, trade center, which of course was on Nahal Mutzri, on the Brook of Egypt, you mentioned in connection with Tiglath-Pileser III. We also know that in 716, Sargon likewise opened up a Karum there.
No, but I was talking about the Karum that's built next to either Sidon or Tyre.
That's a Phoenician, but we have them in the south as well, Tiglath-Pileser and Sargon in 716. Okay, thank you very much, Aren. I'd like now to welcome back Professor Kenneth Lawson Younger to Israel. Kenneth is the professor of Old Testament Semitic languages and ancient Near Eastern history at Trinity International Divinity School. And he's also the 2012-2013 recipient of the Seymour Gittin Distinguished Professorship Award at the Albright Institute of Archaeological Research, just a few blocks away from us. Professor Yaanger will be addressing us on the Assyrian impact on the West, the Assyriological perspective.
There's a handout that is coming around. And I will apologize in advance for speaking Akkadian with a southern accent.
Use the microphone.
Thought it was there. Okay. I may blast you out. Andreas Fuchs titles one of his recent essays, Warum der Assyriological, Were the Assyrians Cruel? Yet, Mario Fallis has entitled a recent article on Pax Assyriaca in 8th, 7th century BCE. There seems to be a contradiction. For many, the only thing that they know about the Assyrians is their infamous cruelty, their calculated frightfulness, their ideology of terror. And so the very thought of Pax Assyriaca seems utterly contradictory, an oxymoron, if there ever was one. Concerning the Assyrian involvements in the Levant, two very different views have been expressed by archaeologists. The site of Tel Mikne Ekron has been a particular point of contention. Sai Gittin, as already mentioned, the excavator has attributed the increase of the olive oil production to the Assyrian kings. However, Avi Faust has, as you've already heard, argued, of course, that the Assyrians had no interest in manipulating the economy, only extracting wealth. I will note that Faust quotes the Assyriologist Kurt Grayson, who I will now quote. The Assyrian view of the economy of the empire was simplistic. The ruled territories were there to supply the central state with as much wealth and labor as could be squeezed out of them, and no thought was given to long-range schemes and profits. And so Faust concludes that the Assyrian annexed areas were poor and desolate, and prosperity, as seen in the olive oil industry, was always outside the borders of the empire. In fact, he argues that the Assyrian provinces were in a deep recession, end quote. So now, in order to say something meaningful about the southern Levantine situation, I'm going to return to my initially posed oxymoron. It is very clear that our knowledge about the Assyrians as being cruel and our formulation of the phrases calculated frightfulness and ideology of terror are the product of intensive study by historians of the Assyrian royal inscriptions and Assyrian palace reliefs. If one only reads these, the impression is that the Assyrian Empire was a uniquely efficient and remorseless warmongering and bloodthirsty military machine with Hitler-like connotations, the real evil empire. This essentialist view of Assyria as nothing but a brutal autocratic state that constantly attacked defenseless opponents was widespread in scholarship in the 20th century, as Eckhart Fromm has demonstrated, although there were notable exceptions, like, for example, the late Chaim Tadmor. The fact is that an overly literal reading of the Assyrian royal inscriptions can result in an erroneous transfer onto the royal inscriptions a presumed historical objectivity when, in fact, their declared aim was the aggrandizing of the Assyrian kingship before God and man alike. In short, there is a danger of falling victim to their propaganda. However, the plethora of non-royal documents from the state archives of the Assyrian Empire provide a radically different look at the Assyrian foreign policy than the one portrayed in the royal inscriptions and palace reliefs all by themselves. The heavy reliance on the royal inscriptions is understandable in that these have been more accessible to scholars. However, with the State Archives of Assyria project, as well as the publication of other newly discovered Neo-Assyrian texts, a more comprehensive and balanced view of the Neo-Assyrian Empire is possible. It becomes clear that Pax Assyriaca was concerned with obtaining maximal profit, and in order to do this, it required good management through the encouragement of shulmu, peace. Time does not permit me to pursue this in the manner and detail that Mario Fallas has done in his recent book. What I will attempt to do is draw from some of these non-royal documents as well as from various other sources to help envision a more complex image of the Assyrian Empire than the simplistic view that the royal inscriptions alone paint. In the first place, the non-royal documents do not show that the Assyrian provinces were in a deep recession, or that the Assyrians did not invest in the conquered regions. The impression that immediately emerges from a survey of these documents is that there was capital, and that investment, including contracts with the king himself, were productive of worthy returns. Furthermore, these documents attest to trade and commerce throughout the empire, with merchants and caravans crisscrossing its territory via numerous routes. The text also witnessed to the Assyrian state's investments in canals on the Habor and on the Euphrates, verified through archaeology such as at Tel Sheikh Hamad, ancient Dur Katlimu. There was a continuity in the Neo-Assyrian period with the earlier Middle Assyrian agricultural development policy. While the Middle Assyrian Dunu was no longer the pattern, the Neo-Assyrian agricultural estates and programs of development were clearly based on an earlier model. An interesting example can be seen in the development of the Wadi Ajaj region, just to the west of Dur Katlimu, to the east of Dur Katlimu, as you can see on the map. In the days of Adad-Nirari III, under the authority of the strong man Palil Arish, or Nergal Arish, 331 towns being established, a type of colonialization according to Weissert. The capital investment of the state in the complex fort system all along the upper and middle Euphrates, now so thoroughly documented by the French archaeological teams, demonstrates a type of lime system that both protected the agricultural integrity of the Jazeera and the important trade routes of the empire. In fact, the constant attention given by the Assyrian monarchy to the protection and maintenance of the trade routes is evidence of the Assyrian interest about long-distance trade and its cultivation. This is seen in the Assyrians establishing Karani, that is, ports or quays, that's the plural of Karu. Beat Karani as well, trading post. The recent study of the Karu system by Yamata demonstrates this point. Have a look at all the Karus. So the name Kar X, port or quay of X, where X is most often a divine or royal name, was purposely chosen to show that the Assyrians were ready to enhance the local economy by encouraging the trade along their new frontiers. As Yamata observes, the Karu system attests to Assyrian kings' commitment to trade, and the clustering of Karus in the west and in the Zagros Mountains was not fortuitous. Along with the Karu system, there was also the Duru system, the Dur X, the fortress of X. These were military fortifications meant to protect Assyrian trade interest. Thus, the Assyrians used various strategies in different parts of the empire to enhance their commercial interest. A quick perusal of the everyday epistolary documents demonstrates the deep interest that the Assyrian crown had in shulmu of the provinces and in the agricultural status, especially issues of the harvest. This was not simply all about what could be extracted to the Assyrian center. There were needs for the maintenance of food supplies throughout the empire, not only for the military, but for moving people. As I have argued elsewhere, the Assyrian deportations were not death marches. The sources relate to us that the Assyrian officials that were responsible for delivering the deportees had to do so in good health, okay, under even the penalty of death, as you can see in this inscription, which I will not read. The allocation of food rations was an important factor in this movement process. For example, a high official named Ashur Shalamani writes to Tiglath-Pileser III that he has 6,000 captives who will not survive because he does not have enough grain to feed them. He suggests transferring 3,000 of the captives to another official in order to settle. Now, at this point, I would like to say a word about the Assyrian involvements in their clients' economies. Faust has made a distinction between the Assyrian provinces that were in deep recession and the areas outside the borders of the empire where there was prosperity, and that this argues against the Assyrians' involvement. Moreover, he concludes that that it was the Phoenicians who were responsible then for the oil industry. While I can grant that the Phoenicians may have had a significant role in it, the stark contrast that Faust paints between life on either side of the border is problematic. There are two documents that are particularly relevant to this issue, namely the situation of the Phoenician city-states who were client states outside the borders of the empire. The first document is a letter of Kurdi Ashur Lamur to Tiglath-Pileser III, which you have on the handout, the full text. Now, interestingly, there is a rich contrast in the first section, and I'm only going to speak to the first section. Unfortunately, I just don't have time. I had to cut a lot. Between the Assyrian carrot and the Assyrian stick policies. First, the Assyrian carrot can be vividly seen. Kurdi Ashur Lamur follows through with the king's command to speak kind words with him, that is, with Hiram, the king of Tyre. Kurdi Ashur Lamur states, all the ports of trade have been released to him. They are in Hiram's control. His servants go in and out of the trading post as they wish, and they sell and buy. Mount Lebanon is at his disposal, which is by a legal, that's a legal phrase. And they go up and down as they wish, and they bring down the timber. Whoever brings down timber, I collect his tax. So the Assyrian governor outlines a manifestly laissez-faire policy. Other than a tax collected on the timber, the Tyrians do as they please. Ki libi shunu. Note this is emphasized twice in the passage. In contrast to this, there is the Assyrian stick, and this is manifested in the next section, where he reports on the Sidonians. The Sidonians chased away the tax collector whom I appointed to the ports of trade that had been added to me in Sidon. Subsequently, I sent the Etuians into Mount Lebanon, and they caused the people to panic. Later on, when they, the Sidonians, had written to me, they had taken back the tax collector and brought him into Sidon. Thus I said to the Sidonians as follows, bring down the timber, do your work therein, but do not sell it to the Egyptians or to the Philistines, otherwise I will no more permit you to ascend the mountain. Because the Sidonians rebelled against the collection of Assyrian taxes, Kurdi Ashur Lamur sent in the Assyrian police force, that is, the Etuians, a nice Aramean group. I'm writing a book on the Arameans, so this is one of my interesting groups. They caused panic among the Sidonians. The result was the Sidonian submission. While the Assyrian governor allowed the Sidonians to cut timber, he nevertheless placed a clear restriction on them selling it to the Egyptians or the Philistines. If they ignored him and sold it to these people, the governor threatened to revoke their access. This letter highlights the opposition between kind and harsh words, or carrot and stick policies, as integrated instruments of a full diplomatic and economic technique. Note that the restriction to not sell to the Egyptians and Philistines only applied to the Sidonians. So although Tyre was not a province having its own king, the Assyrians nonetheless were highly involved in the city-state's economy. And this is even more so the case in Sidon. The fact is, the Assyrians established their kepu, that is, official, not only in provinces but also in client kingdoms. The Assyrian carrot policy towards Tyre required an intentional decision, just as in the case of Sidon, which required the Assyrian stick. Now, the second document is the treaty between Ashur-Haddon and Baal, king of Tyre, the relevant portion being on pages 2 and 3 of the handout. Time does not allow me to comment extensively. Thus, I will simply point out some important observations based on a fresh study of the treaty. First, In lines 6 to 16, the role of the Assyrian Kepu at Tyre is outlined. In particular, the requirement that he be present when letters to the Tyrrhenian king were opened. Thus, the passage stresses that decisions must be made with the consent of the Kepu. Lines 15 to 17 outline maritime law regarding ships belonging to Baal and to the people of Tyre that wreck within the territorial waters of the Philistines or Assyrian territory. All the contents belong to Ashur-Haddon. Presumably, the ownership of the shipwrecks within Tyrrhenian territorial waters belonged to the Tyrrhenians. Yet, in lines 18 to 22, Ashur-Haddon assigned to Baal numerous ports of trade and land routes. To these, Baal has unrestricted access. And so we can see here in the slide that the ports of trade were given, and these are the Karani and the trade routes, the Hulani. And these are outlined then, the trade routes, that is to Akko and Dor, also then the ports that are in the district of the Philistines, and the ports that are in the Assyrian territory on the sea coast, this would be north, and in addition, the port of Byblos, all of the other cities in Mount Lebanon, etc., every place Baal can in fact enter. The structure of the list can be seen here in this table. I wish I had time to comment further on it, but it's based on the very structure of the Assyrian text. These stipulations belong beyond any shadow of a doubt, make it unambiguous that the Assyrians were intimately involved in maritime trade of the Phoenicians. From this speedy review of these two documents, and I could add quite a number of others, it can be clearly seen that the Assyrians were involved in the economy of their clients to the degree that they felt necessary. Now, an important testimony to how the Assyrians impacted their clients' kingdoms' economies can also be seen in the old Aramaic inscription of Bar Rakib from Zinjirli, which you have on the handout. And you'll notice that he claims a great loyalty and blessing as the result of being connected to Tiglath-Pileser, and that his kingdom prospered greatly, both his father and himself. I'm not going to read the text. Many of you are familiar with it. On the other hand, I want to add another text, and that is the hieroglyphic Luvian Phoenician bilingual from Chinnikoi. Both of these paint a very vivid picture of the Assyrians, where in the Chinnikoi inscription, you'll notice that the Assyrian king and the Assyrian house are credited as being a father and a mother to Owaraku. Very interesting language, to say the least, for a client king. So both of these then paint a rich image of the Assyrian kings, quite the opposite of brutal, oppressive overlords. I would like to say a quick word about building 650 at Ekron. Gittin argued that the plan of this temple complex was based on a Neo-Assyrian design concept. Stephen Holloway argued that this Assyrian design was most akin to the Beit Akiti of Ashur, of the god Ashur in the city of Ashur, although he rightly concluded that the chances of finding an Assyrian Beit Akiti dedicated to the patron god of Assyria in a client kingdom are next to nothing. However, Beate Pongratz-Leisten has investigated the Assyrian institutionalizing of the Akitu festival. She demonstrated that one must abandon the concept of an Akitu celebrated in the same standardized form in both Babylonia and Assyria. She also demonstrated that in Assyria, the Akitu for Ashur was only conducted in the city of Ashur. And there were other Beit Akiti at various cities which held festivals for the promotion of the cult of their respective patron deities, not Ashur. So, for example, the Beit Akiti in Arbail was for the goddess Ishtar. The cult of each patron deity was already established before its respective city was incorporated into the Assyrian Empire. Thus, the cult of the city god experienced a special financial and theological promotion. This can be shown, for example, in the case of Sin of Aren. Interestingly, the king who promoted a significant number of the patron deities with Beit Akiti was, in fact, Ashur-Haden. Moreover, the record of the existence of a number of these Beit Akiti is only known at present textually, not archaeologically. It is very possible that many, maybe even all, of these Beit Akiti had a similar architectural design to the Beit Akiti in the city of Ashur. The Assyrian promotion of foreign deities is certainly known. For example, the growth and popularity of the goddess Kubaba even after the demise of the Carchemish independence. Karen Rotner has recently, very recently, published an additional fragment to the Tel Sheikh Hamad inscription. I want to thank Professor Rotner for sharing that with me, which confirms the endowment of the temple of the local deity Salmanu by Adad-nirari III at that site, and shows that this was an ongoing Assyrian royal policy. Holloway was completely correct then in rejecting the deity Ashur being represented at Ekron, for which there is, of course, no evidence. But the use of an Assyrian-type architectural design might be tied to the endowing of the patron goddess of Ekron. My suggestion now has additional evidence. And I must move to this slide. In the newly published loyalty oath of Ashur-Haden from Tel Tayanat, Lauinger, 2012, a previously unknown curse is preserved. May Sharat Ekron, the queen of Ekron, make a worm fall out from your insides. Okay. Clearly, this is a reference to the goddess mentioned in the Tel Mikne Ekron inscription. And clearly, this queen of Ekron, Sharat Amkaruna, has a special promoted status in the late Assyrian loyalty oath curses. Thus, it is a possible explanation then to the temple's design and the importance of Ekron's goddess within the late Assyrian Empire. Conclusion. There were complex demands throughout the Assyrian Empire that were always in constant flux. Therefore, the need to prioritize and take care of the various needs were a definite and consistent concern. All this indicates that the economy of the Neo-Assyrian Empire was not simplistic, contra Grayson, and that the ruled territories were not there simply to supply the central state with as much wealth and labor as could be squeezed out of them, with no thought given to long-range schemes and profits. I am not saying, lest you hear me wrongly, that the Assyrian kings were not cruel. They were most certainly in their warfare. Nor am I implying that they were interested in raising the standard of living of their varied subject peoples, whether they're in their provinces or client states. This was not a matter that deprived them of sleep. What I am concerned with is a balancing of the overemphasis that neglects the important documents that are not part of the official royal inscriptions, thus providing us with a more nuanced view of the Assyrian economic interest, rejecting the view that sees the Assyrians as purely stupid brutes and bullies. While the Assyrians were most certainly cruel in warfare, the evidence shows that they were also most certainly interested in economic growth and development as outlined above. Thank you.
Open for comments.
There's
Yonatan.
Yonatan.
So, thank you. This is really most interesting. I have a question and a remark. So about that structure in Ekron.
Yes.
Is it in the city or outside the city? That's important if you want to be in a Beit Akiti, you have to be outside.
Yeah, it does, except there seems to, because we don't have archaeological evidence except for Ashur, where it is clearly outside. In fact, it's actually designated the Beit Akiti Shah Tseru, or Aseri. It is clearly outside the city. But we don't know the others. So because these were endowed and promoted, I'm speculating that possibly they are not all outside the city, because the idea here is and I'm building on Pongratz Leiston's work, that they were really more concerned about the promotion of the local deity. He has another follow-up.
The other remark, just to call the attention to what it says in the letter, that if it was up to the Tyrians, they would sell the timber to the Egyptians and the Philistines. So they had actually alternative trade routes by sea, while the Assyrians imposed on them the duty not to take those routes by sea, but rather to sell it into Assyria.
The impression that I have in the first part there with the designations for what the Tyrrhenians can do is that basically they can do whatever they like, as long as they pay the tax on the wood that they bring down, and there's no restriction on where they send it. The restriction contextually is only on the Sidonians.
Okay, Sidonians.
Yeah. So I'm separating the two here.
Okay.
No, I just want to say that normally, of course, the Akitu temple is outside.
Yeah.
But in Nineveh, it's in the lower city, so.
Yes. Thank you.
Sometimes it's enough to be outside of the Acropolis.
Okay. Did you hear that comment? Nineveh gives an example. The lower city, the Beit Akiti is located in the lower city, so sometimes it's enough to be outside the Acropolis. Thank you very much.
Daniel?
I just wanted to make it more difficult, because maybe in this room 4 years ago, William Morrow gave a lecture saying that building 650 does not have any Assyrian elements in it. So that would take the whole argument of.
Sure. Of course it would, and that's I'm in no position to actually address that. I did talk to Sai last week. So what I would basically say is, even if it doesn't link up exactly, and I'll admit the last part is speculative. It struck me that there was something interesting about these Beit Akiti, and that this endowing of deities, and the fact that the goddess of Ekron is mentioned in this clear Neo-Syrian loyalty oath. It just seemed to be coincidental.
In one.
What's that?
In one, only in one, only in the last one, the China one. In all the other texts.
Yeah, the other, it's not preserved. They're fragmentary, so it could be there.
Please.
I've actually argued that Temple 650 has Aegean features in it.
Yeah.
Happy to
Okay.
talk about that later.
All right, we can throw out my temple then. I mean, I'm not living by it.
1 second. Talai?
Doesn't preclude having 6 files.
Talai louder if they can.
Having 6 files of compilations of different inspiration,
Yes.
including, no doubt, Assyrian
Yeah.
architecture.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, Sai nuances this and says that there are, Professor Gittin distinguishes that there are Egyptian influences, Assyrian influences, Canaanite influences. It's not exclusively Assyrian. What struck me was the evaluation of the limited Assyrian elements by Holloway pointed to the Beit Akiti, and that's why I linked it up.
We have time for 1 or 2 more short questions, please.
Does the development in the West by the Assyrians also receive kind of an impetus by association of the lands in the West with the Assyrian hosts? So cabinet and the interior ministry, if you wish, of the Assyrian house is proffers to the sort of cabinet members developmental opportunities in the lands which are associated with each office, right?
Right.
So it's not just a matter of their interest in going there and flattening them.
Right.
They're quite interested in capitalizing on, literally capitalizing on.
Literally capitalizing, and certainly in the case of Ashurbanipal, there ends up being a governor who serves as eponym from Tyre.
Okay, Israel?
With regard to the Sharat Echo in Tel Taina, this is likely connected to the presence of Philistine population in this area, so it's, you know, the northern Philistia. So it possibly that they took this specifically, this goddess, because it was known maybe a different name in this population.
Yeah, I mean, I just think obviously this goddess must have been substantial in status enough that that she gets elevated into the loyalty oath curse, and that this would be found in an Assyrian tablet in the temple at Tel Tainat. Remember, this loyalty oath was found on the temple floor in the excavations by Tim Harrison.
Thank you.
Yes.
I've just been informed there's been a emendation to the text. The fourth lecture will be given also in English. So for those who were thinking of leaving because of the Hebrew, please, you're invited to stay. Our next lecturer is Dr. Ниלי WazanaL. Ниלי is senior lecturer in two different departments here at the university, in the Bible department and the history of the biblical period, and she also is the editor of the Shnaton, our annual for biblical and ancient Near Eastern studies. Nili will be addressing us on the voices of the vanquished, reactions to Assyrian power in the Bible.
It is often said that history is written by the victorious. Yet the Bible is the best example of history written by the side that suffered defeat. The people of Israel had lost their political independence, their religious centers, and their territory, and were led to exile in a couple of stages. First, the conquest of the northern kingdom by the Assyrian Empire, then the conquest of Judah by the Babylonians. The Bible is not only history written by the side that had suffered defeat, it may very well be that it was written and collected initially because it was the voice of the vanquished. The beginning of the literary process may be traced to the end of the 8th century BCE, when Judah became home for many Israelite refugees. The northern Israelite immigrants, who shared many of Judah's religious beliefs, probably brought with them some of their literary traditions. It is no accident that the first reliable indication of formal literary activity is from the reign of Hezekiah, in whose days the northern kingdom was terminated. The book of Proverbs 25 verse 1 remarks, "These are also Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied out." Many of the biblical texts were composed in the course of the 8th to the 6th centuries BCE. Judah received a near-fatal blow at 701 during the campaign of Sennacherib to the west. For the bigger part of the last century of its existence, the kingdom of Judah was a loyal vassal of the new Assyrian Empire. The Bible devotes very little explicit space to this state, but Assyrian power cast a giant shadow over the creation of the Bible in its initial phase. Written when Assyria presided over Judah, the literary activity instigated at that time reflects reactions to this reality, as well as to the ideological challenges of existence under imperial pressure. Coping with the rapid and crushing Assyrian conquests, both of the northern kingdom and of Judah itself, then with the burden of the Assyrian rule, formed an unprecedented challenge for the people of Judah. Like other contemporary political entities, the kingdoms of Israel and Judah rose to power during a window of opportunity created with the demise of world powers at the end of the 2nd millennium BCE. During the first part of their existence, the national kingdoms knew no form of threat from an imperial power. This experience changed radically with the rise of the Age of Empires, beginning with the Neo-Assyrian expansion. The Assyrian campaigns to the area were the first time biblical Israel had had to contend with a conquering force that swept over the Levant and subjugated all local powers one by one. The swiftness of the expanding Assyrian hegemony, with its integral political ideology and propaganda, presented a new ideological challenge. The Assyrian kings used propaganda as a tool of control, both internal and imperial, enhancing their military force. Assyrian propaganda was disseminated to the literate elite in Assyrian cities and was also circulated among the subjects in all parts of the empire, enforcing their divine sanctioned right to rule the world. The message was loud and clear. A triumphant, victorious Assyrian king vanquishes his arrogant, cunning, yet dull-witted and disloyal enemies who dared to resist him. The Bible, containing literature created and articulated among the literate elite during these turbulent times, holds the key to the various reactions to this first ever challenge in national history. In this paper, I am not looking for just any possible contacts between biblical literature and Neo-Assyrian inscriptions of various genres, myth, law, prophecy, wisdom, a well-known topic in biblical studies. I am aiming to shed some light on texts which, in my view, reflect a reaction to the challenge and threat posed by the Assyrian Empire, its reality and ideology. In past research, attention has been focused on explicit statements mentioning Assyria, the words of Rav Shakeh in 2 Kings 18, and the prophecy regarding Assyria, Ha, Assyria, rod of my anger, in Isaiah 10 are prime examples. Deuteronomy 2 has been often compared to Neo-Assyrian literature, whether the entire book or specific parts of it, notably the law against the provocateur in Deuteronomy 13, or the curses in Deuteronomy 28. Eckhart Otto points to the subversive motivation of the book of Deuteronomy. According to him, Deuteronomy originated as a political document, providing a religious alternative to Assyrian royal power through the concept of a vassal treaty with God. His interpretation offers a hidden, implicit polemic underlying the making of the book of Deuteronomy. It is noteworthy that the entire book of Deuteronomy, written in Judah during the 7th century BCE, when it was an Assyrian vassal, does not mention Assyria even once, while Egypt, its twin in prophetic literature, is mentioned 26 times. Which texts reflect an implicit reaction to the Assyrian power? I would like to connect two features of biblical texts. One, the Bible is the only considerable body of literature that had survived from the vanquished peoples of the ancient Near East of the first millennium BCE. The literature that had otherwise reached us originated mostly from the centers of the conquerors, Mesopotamia in particular. Two, there are some biblical concepts that have no parallels in contemporary literary compositions that had survived from the ancient Near East. These items on what has been often termed the special traits list have been discarded as accidental. Scholars, and I would like to mention machinists among others, warned that it is only a matter of time before eventually some correspondence will appear somewhere in the ancient Near East for every distinctive concept, removing it from the special traits list. I suggest that it is possible to reconstruct a cause and effect relationship between the submissive status of Israel and Judah and the biblical concepts that have no parallels in contemporary ancient Near Eastern literature. Many of the items on the special traits list may be explained and better understood as reactions to Assyrian rule and power. Had we been lucky enough to recover the compositions of other vanquished peoples of the time, I believe we would have seen various similar concepts and behaviors that are to be found now only within the Bible. I would like to suggest this link as a working hypothesis, seeing it offers a plausible explanation for many distinctive biblical texts. I suggest that many of the items on the special traits list are the outcome of the fact that the Bible was formed by a vanquished people, whereas the literature that had survived from the ancient Near East typically reflects the conquering societies. The first example I would like to present here for this phenomenon is the Deuteronomic laws of war. Most of these laws are on the special traits list, as the book of Deuteronomy is the only ancient Near Eastern and biblical legal corpus which extensively deals with the question of correct wartime behavior towards the enemy. These laws or regulations are set in the heart of the book, chapters 20 to 24. The first group of regulations is placed in one sequence in chapter 20, and they deal with terms of exemption from the army, terms of surrender of a besieged city, and with a prohibition to cut down fruit trees during a prolonged siege. The rest of the laws are embedded within other materials in the following chapters and deal with correct treatment of the captive woman and with a prohibition to defecate in the camp. In comparison to the rules that govern other public administrative institutions, such as the judicial system or the priesthood, the rules pertaining to war do not deal at all with the main military activities carried out by soldiers or by martial leaders, such as establishing the army or determining military hierarchy, command and discipline, strategic issues such as mastering the army, setting it in motion, logistics, supplies and resources, nor do they address matters relevant to the tactics of battle itself. Rather, they deal with what might be termed the liminal aspects of war, particularly with those affected by it, women and children, cattle, trees, but also males, members of the attacking force. Thus, the first law exempts from war those who have built a house, planted a vineyard, and paid the bride price for a wife, but have not enjoyed their investments. The very situation of war here is seen as a potential threat, even curse, although the laws supposedly pertain to a situation in which the people of Israel are the attackers, as is clear from the protasis. When you take the field against your enemies, when you approach a town to attack it, when you go out as a troop against your enemies. Unlike modern war laws, these are inner Israelite reflections and not binding effective international laws. Note that there are no punishments. The laws do not refer to extreme atrocities, the likes of which the prophet Amos rebuked in his prophecies against the nations, such as exiling entire populations or ripping open pregnant women. If Deuteronomy's war laws were only a reaction to the cruelty suffered by the Israelites in the Assyrian wars, as many scholars believe, we would expect much harsher examples than prevention of cutting down fruit trees or defecating in the camp. The laws also do not refer to all war situations. The military activity depicted in them typifies act of imperialistic expansion, and only of a certain kind. The offensive approach here is not described as war between armies in the open field, but as an unequal confrontation between the attacking superior side, building camps, besieging the towns of the enemy, subjecting the conquered population to forced labor, cutting down fruit trees around besieged towns, killing the enemy's fighters, and taking the daughters captive, versus a passive side, shut in its fortified towns. This scene is easy to identify, typifying wars of imperial expansion. Israel and Judah were well acquainted with towns under siege, military camps, cutting down of fruit trees and captive women, but from the viewpoint of the weak, attacked, defensive, losing, and eventually vanquished side. The rules of war reflect subversive criticism of wars of expansion. They are, therefore, an ideological polemic against the military and political pressure Israel and Judah experienced at the time when this text was composed. Criticizing these acts implicitly and indirectly, these rules denote the viewpoint of the underdogs, the victims of such actions. The reversal of roles and positioning of Israel in the offensive, winning side enabled the authors of the laws to contend with Assyrian imperial propaganda. On the one hand, it enables the vanquished to position themselves as the winning strong side. At the same time, criticism is leveled against the reality created in situations of imperialistic war. They condemn the usual brutalizing effect of this activity, its damage to all concerned, to the conquered people, to the environment, as well as to the attacking society. An important observation is that imperialistic war is not seen as illegal or demonic as such, but potentially evil and dangerous. Evil yet prevalent, imperial wars of expansion must be restrained and restricted by God's instructions, and this will be what Israel would do when she will fill the role of an expanding empire. This attitude resembles another set of rules, that is, those pertaining to the establishment of the monarchy in Deuteronomy 17, verses 14 to 20. The anti-monarchical attitude is another distinctive biblical idea, unparalleled in ancient Near Eastern literature. The writers of the anti-monarchical passages themselves are aware of the uniqueness of this position, depicting the people's will to appoint a king as the outcome of their longing to be like all other nations. In the law of the king, God adheres to the people's wish to appoint a human king over them, yet restricts the powerful position. Like wars of expansion, monarchy is not illegal or prohibited as such, but must be restrained and restricted. The restrictions are of two different kinds. Before the setting of the king of Israel, there are two preconditions. He must be chosen by God, and he must be an Israelite. This is stated both in the positive, be sure to set a king over yourself, one of your own people, מקרב אחיך, תשים עליך מלך, and in the negative as a prohibition, you must not set a foreigner over you, one who is not your kinsman. Following the conditions for the setting of the king, he is prohibited from three actions. He must not amass horses, he shall not have many wives, for those may lead his heart astray, nor shall he amass silver and gold to excess, so that he will not act haughtily towards his fellows. Those three traits are representative of kingship in general, of empires in particular. Ordinary people are incapable of amassing horses, wives, and riches. Not all local kings necessarily do that either. Amassing horses, wives, and riches are three excesses typical of ancient rulers of empires. The horses are necessary for building a significant army, capable of executing large-scale open-field battles. Maintaining a professional chariot force is extremely expensive and requires specialization as well as reliance on international trade. Procuring multiple wives is another indication of empires. Local kings may have multiple wives. Rulers of empires always do, as international marriages are an important aspect of diplomatic relationships. Along with horses, silver, and gold, amassing wives represents empires more than kingdoms. The law of the king curtails precisely the symbolic elements of empire. In the Deuteronomistic historiography, the criticism is taken even farther, positioning monarchy as opposed to God's rule, explicitly stated when God orders Samuel to heed to the demand of the people. For it is not you that they have rejected, it is me they have rejected as their king. This is in 1 Samuel 8. Yet even in that text, the initial demand of the people is answered positively by God, ordering Samuel heed the demand of the people. Similarly to the rules of war, the law of the king does not regard monarchy as illegal or forbidden, but potentially dangerous. This required institution must be restrained and restricted by God's instructions. The raison d'être of the anti-monarchical standpoint is grounded in ideological reactions to Assyrian royal propaganda. The concept that the human king reflecting the Assyrian overlord is the opposite of divine authority who presumes to control life and death. The concept that the human king reflecting the Assyrian overlord is the opposite of divine rule goes hand in hand with depictions of Sennacherib as a godlike authority who presumes to control life and death. This, of course, is unbearable hubris, leading to his untimely murder by his own sons. It also fits the use of the political model of ruler-vassal relationships that characterizes the relations between God and Israel. The Assyrian rule is depicted implicitly as opposed to divine rule. God is the one true overlord of Israel, and her loyalty to him is to him alone. Both the laws of war and the law of the king are a polemic against the Assyrian Empire. Is it also a polemic against the very notion of empire? Deuteronomy and Deuteronomistic literature also promise Israel she will rule as an empire over vast territories and peoples, sometimes in the glorious future. God's promise to Abraham, appended to the covenant between the pieces, is a promise of a future empire. To your offspring I assign this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. The patriarchal promise, as articulated in Deuteronomy and in the Deuteronomistic literature, bear typological and conceptual resemblances to the description of military and territorial gains in Assyrian royal inscriptions. For example, in Joshua 1, every spot on which your foot treads I give to you as I promised Moses. Your territory shall extend from the wilderness and this Lebanon to the great river, the river Euphrates, the whole Hittite country, and up to the great sea on the west. The prominent geographical elements which occur in the descriptions of the promised land also appear in Assyrian depictions: seas, mountains, rivers, and deserts, virtually identical in many cases, such as Mount Lebanon, the whole Hittite country, and the Great Sea. While the royal inscriptions illustrate an actual reign, and the assertion is not an empty boast but relies upon real military victories, the biblical text deals with a promise rather than with its fulfillment. The territory is defined by means of spatial merisms, and the description employs general or specific topographical phenomena. The Deuteronomistic concept of the Promised Land as an unlimited empire may consequently be understood to have developed against the background of Neo-Assyrian imperial propaganda. God's promise to his people constitutes a counter-response to Assyrian propaganda, against the message that the Assyrian king is the vanquisher and ruler of the world. The Deuteronomistic promissory texts assert that the Israelites are designated as destined for dominion over the whole earth. God promises his people imperial world power, identical in scope to that of the Assyrians, this promise already being made to Abraham, the founding father. At the same time, the model of empire Deuteronomy promotes is restricted and limited both in the conduct of wars of expansion and in the nature of citizen number one in the empire, who is not a foreigner, that is Assyrian, but an Israelite. Furthermore, any Israelite, one of your brothers, no one special. In summary, I see a link between the list of special traits, elements that appear in biblical literature, in particular in Deuteronomy and the Deuteronomistic layer, unparalleled by contemporary ancient Near Eastern texts, and the fact that biblical texts reflect the voice of the vanquished. I suggest that in many cases, though not all, these texts represent the standpoint of the vanquished, giving voice to a polemic, anti-Assyrian concept. While not mentioning Assyria explicitly even once, the book of Deuteronomy in particular, and Deuteronomistic literature in general, severely criticized Assyrian rule, while offering consolation from the stress and distress of the vanquished by placing Israel in the place of the winners. This, I suggest, might help understand better both the very existence of those concepts belonging to the special traits list and to portray the reaction of the people of Israel to the circumstances forced upon her upon entering the age of empires introduced by Assyria.
We're open for discussion. Bezalel?
Are you implying that Genesis 15, 19, this is...
Deuteronomistic?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's an appendix. It's not. It uses the same phrase "haaretz hazot," which you find within the text of Genesis 15 in a different meaning, and I think that it belongs to a Deuteronomistic level of which is found not in very many places, but is found within the four first books of the Pentateuch.
So just that verse, not the whole chapter.
The two second verses, and that one and the one after it, the mentioning of the different peoples as well. Yeah.
You got it.
With regard to literature written by a defeated population, there is at least one other example. We have this papyrus Agar 63, which is Aramaic and Demotic script, which at least according to the translator, Richard Steiner, it was written by a group of people deported from the eastern part of Assyria to the west, to the land of Israel. I do not recall there any sort of these anti-imperial polemics, but it might be interesting to compare this to what might want.
Thank you. Though, of course, there is a slight difference, and that is that it's, the Bible, again, and this is a unique feature of the Bible, that it's a canonized text. Yeah, there is a basic difference between any literature that we find in the ancient Near East and the Bible, and that is that the Bible is a canonized text which has gone over a lot of processes and of course editing, but generally speaking, yes, it's an interesting text.
Nili, I'd like to address a question to you which may be very pedantic, but if we're in one of the triad that the king should not do such and such in reference to amassing multiple wives as a counter to what is, I would say, very prevalent in the ancient Near East, if we're talking about the Assyrian times, it's anti-Assyrian propaganda, what we do know, of course, from Sennacherib and Ashurbanipal, we have Nakia Zakuta, we have Ashusharat, who are apparently, unless somebody can add another name or two, I think are as wives themselves, if we're talking about the legal situation of a wife monogamous. They have, of course, multiple concubines. You see the same thing in a world power, though it's not Assyrian. We have the Babylonian, and when in Daniel, when they invite the Shegal, the Shai Kali comes in, she is one. But he has many lechinata, he has many, of course, concubines. So if we're talking about anti-Assyrian polemic in reference to multiple wives, if you're including the harem, then it definitely would be correct. But if you're talking about, so to speak, the wife itself, I think that they, in their text, the Assyrian text, they mention just a single.
Thank you very much, but yeah, I'm including the harem, fine.
Right, yeah, Kenneth.
There are the Nimrud Queen's tombs that should be added to that picture. So it's fairly complex.
Yeah. Okay, Nili, thank you very much. Our last speaker, and for those who came in late, I remind you the lecture is also going to be in English. Will be delivered by Elnathan Weissert. Elnathan is an instructor in Assyriology at our university, and he's also an instructor in Bible and Assyriology in our overseas school. He will be lecturing on the king as intermediary between heaven and earth, Maliku, Amelu in Assyria, and pele, yoetz in Isaiah.
No, kacha? Is it okay from the voice? Oh, the king is intermediary between heaven and earth. Two terms, Maliku amelu in Akkadian and pele, yoetz in biblical Hebrew. We will deal today with one biblical verse, although these two, Isaiah 9:6-7, majority text 5-6, clearly go together. The beginning of the second verse, Lemarbea Misra, is very difficult, so I will leave it for now. And maybe it could be that this Lemarbea Misra is the final part of verse number 6. כי ילד יולד לנו, בן ניתן לנו, ותהי המשרה על שכמו, ויקרא שמו פele yoetz, אל גיבור, אבי עד שר השלום. Maybe למרבה המשרה, but we don't have time to deal with it now. For the Christians since early times, very early times, this was a hint, a prophecy to the coming of Jesus Christ. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. 4 couplets. It is, of course, difficult for the Jewish exegetes to accept the fact that the future king of Judea, or maybe Hezekiah, if it refers to Hezekiah himself, is called Mighty God. This is unprecedented in biblical literature. Therefore, lots of efforts were done and many tricks to avoid the translation Mighty God or the reference of the couplet Mighty God, of the genitive compound Mighty God, to the king himself. Christians have no problems about that, although I would say that Prince of Peace is then metaphorically. I will show later that Prince can be taken not metaphorically, really Prince, and not Prince of Peace, you know. Interestingly enough, not only Christians, for more than 1500 years understand this as a reference or a proof to the fact that the future king of Judah will be a godlike creature, a godlike human being, God really. Also modern scholars comparing this verse to Egyptian literature, royal literature, specifically to the five-fold titulary of the Egyptian king, try to compare this verse to the Egyptian deification of the king, so that during the days of Hezekiah or a little bit later, Egyptian ideology penetrated into Judea, and the king was seen as God per se. This was suggested by many scholars, it was rejected by others, but when I checked a little bit the material, it seemed so far-fetched that I will not now go into the matter. Very, very loose connection between the five titles of the Egyptian king and this one, and a very, of course, it's not only Egyptologists and not only Christians, but also Moshe Weinfeld, who argued that during Hezekiah's times, the ascent of Hezekiah to the throne, specifically after the destruction of the kingdom of Samaria, of Israel, a messianic movement in Judea developed where it was possible in his eyes that a king would indeed be seen as a god per se. This, in my eyes, is untenable. It is impossible, I think, to assume that in one occasion the king would be seen as God. It is never do the prophets speak, and they have so many bad things to say about the kings and their behavior and their hubris, as you said, in so many respects, also against Sennacherib, that he, when he fights against God or blasphemes him, and never it is said that he really thinks that he is God, right? Only maybe in Isaiah 14, where the Assyrian king thinks that he is above, living in the sky, but then he crashes down. He is crashed down by God to earth. So really it is, I think, impossible to believe that Judeans at any time thought that their king, even the future king, would be a god. A god. But it is written here. It is written that he is a mighty God. On the other hand, he is a prince. So what can we do? Let's first go and see, move to the Jewish exegetes. רש"י writes, ויקרא שמו הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא מפליא עצה ואל גיבור, ואבי עד קרא שמו של חזקיהו שר שלום, etc. So he thinks that wonderful, counselor, mighty God, the everlasting Father, all refer to God, to the Lord himself, and he calls the prince only with one title, Prince of Peace. I think the effort he does speaks for himself, how unpleasant he is with the title El Gibor, but you would agree with me that Vayikra, Shmo, and then the subject, and then the name is a very bad syntax. JPS of 1970, the first try of tools of the JPS, did another effort, and his name is called Wonderful in Counsel is God, the Mighty, the Everlasting Father, the Ruler of Peace. All this name refers to God himself. All the titles refer to the God. The name of the prince speaks only of the one wondersome nature of God. Okay? Against that, I would say, are the names of sons of, the other names of the sons of Isaiah. Ata Sh'ar Yashuv, Ata Sh'ar Yashuv B'necha, you and your son Sh'ar Yashuv, with the explanation in Isaiah 10:21. Sh'ar Yashuv, Sh'ar Yaakov el Gibor, a remnant will return, a remnant of Jacob will return to the mighty God, refers to the relation between the people and their God, between Israel and their God. Also the name of the second boy, Emmanuel, God is with us, has a relation between God and the people. It's not only titles of gods. The name of the king is not only titles of gods. And the last one does not involve directly the god at all. Quick to plunder, swift to the spoil. Maeir Shalal Chashbaz. Why then should the fourth name be different and refer only to the qualities of the deity? The second attempt to solve the problem of mighty God appears in JPS 1985. It is usage of an older idea of the Italian exegete Luzzatto. The mighty God is planning grace. The eternal Father is planning a peaceable ruler. Yoetz then should be applied in the second part of the verse as well. Vayikra shmo pele yoetz. Vayikra shmo pele yoetz el gibor. The God is planning pele. Sar Shalom is planning Aviad. The eternal Father is planning a minister of peace. Yoetz then taken as the present form, which is not impossible, of course, in biblical Hebrew, but quite rare. Also, we have to check whether yoetz can have a direct object, pele, or a direct object, sar shalom. Does it really mean to plan anything? Or is it just so that it takes normally, okay, there, first of all, here we have Ifli and Etzah together, so another place in Isaiah, but now we see that Atzat Adonai Tzvaot Asher Hu Yoetz, the inner object. Yoetz takes only the inner object Etzah. It may also take, in other places, Yoetz Ra'ah, then it would be Yoetz Etzah Ra'ah. So it's really impossible that Yoetz is a verb, a finite verb, and what I would like to suggest, to stick to the very natural meaning of Yoetz. For example, in Isaiah 19:11a, speaking about Egypt, Evilim sarei tzoan, chachmei yoatzei paro. Yoetz are advisors of the Pharaoh. Sages of Pharaoh, advisors. Okay? Yoetz like chacham. And in another case, in Micha, close to Isaiah in time, Lama tari'i rea hamelech ein bach, im yoatzech avad. Why do you now cry aloud? Have you no king? Has your counselor perished? There for the first time, and we'll refer to it later again, we have the parallel between yoetz and king. So I would say the name in Isaiah 9:6 or 5 Masoretic texts should really involve yoetz as a substantive, not as a present form. Is it possible to find some help in the Assyrian and Babylonian literature? I think yes, although there we have a similar problem, and maybe one solution will help in both cases. Text I'm going to present to you involves the term Maliku amelu. It is a Neo-Babylonian myth of the creation of the king. First created is a Lulu amelu, a simple person, many simple persons, but then the king is missed. And Ea opens his mouth and says to Belet Ili, the goddess of creation, Belet Ili, you are the mistress of the great gods, you are the one who made the human man, the Lulu amelu. Fashion a king, a counselor man, adorn his whole body with excellence, see to his features, etc., etc. And Belet Ili creates the king, the counselor man. The term is Maliku amelu. Sharu Maliku amelu. Ah, here. There it is. Does it work? Excellent. Yofi. Good. The translation as a compound noun, counselor man, was suggested by Foster, and this is a good translation, but it was not. It's not the normal translation. As we will see soon, Livingstone translates it differently. The term Maliku amelu appears again in the Neo-Assyrian coronation hymn of Ashurbanipal. There, the people bless Ashurbanipal, go gather, ask the gods to gather all the gods of heaven and earth, bless King Ashurbanipal, the Maliku amelu, the counselor man. Now, in these two texts, Maliku amelu was treated by Maeir, Livingstone, and Foster. Foster, as we said, took it as a compound noun, counselor man, Maliku amelu, like Chabilu amelu, and other compounds. Chabilu amelu would be the Shoded, the robber. Livingstone understood Maliku amelu as circumspect man, and Maeir überlegend entscheidender Mensch, meaning a wise king, a wise person. How does it come that the verb malakum, which means to give advice, and its participle always advisor and counselor, is translated like this? I think specifically Maeir and Livingstone had a problem that they could not answer. To whom should the king give advice? I mean, the king does not give advice to anybody. He has advisors. He has malikus all the time in his assembly. But to whom does he give advice? So they took Maliku actually as in the same sense like the GT participle, Nitluku, which is Mundalku. There it really means to deliberate, to be deliberative, to be judicious, because you deliberate with yourself. It's like a hitpel. Then you are a wise person if you deliberate and you think and you ponder. But we don't have a GT, we have a G here. Now I think the solution is, if we look, it comes to mind if we see what Maliku, who are the Malikus, other Malikus in the divine realm. For example, an epithet of Ishtar, of Arbela, daughter of Ashur and Molisu. Molisu is the Ishtar of Nineveh. She is called counselor of the gods, her parents, Malikat Ilani Abisha. And also Nusku is called, Nusku of Haran, son of Sin, the moon god, is called Malik Ili Rabuti, counselor of the great god. These two gods are very important deities, but they are of lesser rank. Ishtar is the daughter of Ashur, and Nusku is the son of Haran. It so happens that the kings and people in general, but kings and specifically, have the tendency to turn in their prayers to the lesser god, to the second level of gods, not immediately to Marduk, Ashur, or Sin. They would ask the intermediate, Nusku, or Ishtar of Arbela, to give a good word, to say a good word in front of her fathers when they come into consultation. When they enter the presence, into the presence of their parents and advise them. This is why the king has special relationship, for example, the Assyrian king, to Ishtar of Arbela and to Nusku of Haran. So is it possible that the Maliku amelu king of the Neo-Babylonian myth and the Maliku amelu Ashurbanipal coronation hymn means actually that the king has a direct access as an intermediate to the gods? He would be the Maliku between people and the gods, like Nusku or Ishtar are the intermediates when he wants to turn to the greater gods. Not many years ago, an old Assyrian literary text appeared depicting Sargon of Akkad with a very interesting title, Sargon who discusses matters with the gods, Sha'ishte'ili et Tawuni, again a GT Hitbael form of reciprocality. This does not mean that Sargon speaks praise to the gods, speaks and asks something of the gods. This means that he has a discussion, a back and forth discussion. I think that this would be enough to suggest that Maliku Amelu means counselor man, counselor of the gods. Specifically in the Neo-Assyrian period, the Assyrian kings assumed for themselves a status of very wise people. Sennacherib, Ashurbanipal. For example, Sennacherib says that he has wisdom, also Sargon, equal to that of the sage Adapa, Apkali Adapa. Or in a letter, in an adulatory letter to Ashurbanipal, it is said that he is Liplipi Apkali U Adapa, descendant of the sages and Adapa. And the sages and Adapa, with whom the king is compared, are semi-divine creatures. These are Apkalus, for example. Here, you can see the horns. And here again, having ritual functions, sometimes, many times, with a fish head, fish cloak. And I urge you to read the article of Peter Machini's Kingship and Divinity in Imperial Assyria in this volume, which appeared a few years ago, two years ago, where it is clear he collected lots of material about the intermediate position. Kings of Assyria were never deified, but they had a special status. They were created, formed still in their mother's womb. Their birth was foretold 2 or 3 generations earlier. They were given special wisdom. All this fits, I think, better to Maliku Amelu as an intermediate, not a real god, but an intermediate, a supernatural human being, like an Apkalu. Now, is it possible that yoetz is also advisor, your king is your advisor towards the gods? Indeed, mythological remnants of the conception that even our God had an assembly appear in several places. For example, Isaiah 40, with a rhetoric question, who can fathom the Spirit of the Lord or instruct the Lord as his counselor? Who can? You think? No one, of course, but this only says that someone among the Israelites thinks that it is possible that God has counselors. Most interesting, the friend coming, Job's friend coming to him and telling him, are you the first man ever born? Were you brought forth before the hills? Were you created before the hills? Do you listen in on God's counsel? Habesod Eloah tishma. So God had a counsel. And Job was mistaken to think that he was as important as the first person who, like a king in the Neo-Babylonian myth, was allowed to sit in the council of God. In 2 Samuel, the woman from Tekoa speaks to David and says to him twice, Ki kemalach Elohim ken Adoni HaMelech. And again, Ve'adoni chacham kechochmat malach Elohim. My Lord has wisdom like that of an angel of God. Exactly like Shinat Apkali Adapa, the same idea. The wisdom, in the aspect of wisdom, the king is more valuable than a normal human being. Malach brings us immediately to Manoach, the father of Samson, to whom a Malach appears. Malach doesn't look different from human beings. He doesn't know that he is a Malach. He doesn't know that he is an angel. He doesn't have wings. So he asks him, who are you? And the Malach says, why do you ask my name? It is beyond understanding. It is wonderful. It is transcendent. Pele. And we are now back in our pele in Isaiah 9:6. So, is it possible that the king, the future king of Judea, or Ezekiel, is indeed a counselor to the great God? Pele, an angel who goes between the spheres. I think other titles in this verse further strengthen this point. Specifically, the father, Avi Ad Sarah Shalom. Avi Ad is always seen an eternal father. Father, it was compared to Abu Hammurabi. Not needed. Look what Joseph says. Vayesimeni le'av leFaro. And he was a counselor to Pharaoh. So Av is a title of a counselor. Avi Ad is the eternal counselor. And look again in Isaiah, who knows this usage of Av, and is very mad about Shevna, the administrator, and prophesies that he will fall down, and God will nominate Eliakim ben Chilkiyahu instead of him, and he is a righteous counselor. He will be a father to those who live in Jerusalem and to the people of Judah. V'haya le'av leyoshev Yerushalayim, a counselor, not a father, as figuratively. And the last one, Nahum speaks about the Assyrians and speaks about Assyria. Mimech, from you, from Ashur. Yatsa choshev al Adonai ra'a yoetz bli ya'al. From you came forth one who plots evil against the Lord, a wicked counselor. This must be the reference to Sennacherib, who is seen as the most terrible aggressor against God, with the famous song of contempt by the daughter of Zion. He tries to match God, and therefore is a wicked counselor. He doesn't know what his limits as counselor are. I'm nearing to the end. So I would like to suggest that this verse should be translated, wonderful counselor of the mighty God. And then the whole problem with the deification of Judean gods during Hezekiah's time, or Egyptian influence of a culture which knows the deification, but the Semitic the culture, and specifically the Israelites, I could not believe that they would think about a God as a king, but as a counselor to the God. An everlasting counselor. Father is counselor. Prince, of course, is counselor. Prince, now in the real sense of prince, not figuratively. Tsar, in the government of the God. Okay, after all this was done, by the way, thank you very much to Shalom Paul, who discussed with me Isaiah, you remember, many years ago. Also, thanks are due. Okay, in a moment. Now, was this ever regarded as a possibility? It so happens, I found it by mistake. Hugo Grotius, a Dutch theologian, annotated some verses of the Bible. And he translated in Latin Admirabilis Consultator Dei Fortis, which is our translation. Admire a pele, a wondersome thing, a transcended figure, counselor of the strong God. Here is a picture of this Hugo Grotius, and here is his translation. Imo consultator Dei fortis. So we should not translate counselor, strong, valiant God, but rather counselor of the valiant God. Next, Jeremiah Heinemann prepared in 1855 a translation for the Jews of Germany, the enlightened Jews of Germany who forgot already forgot the Hebrew. So he wrote down in Hebrew letters his German translation. And there he writes, Wundervoller Rater des mächtigen Gottes. That's that. This is advisor of the valiant God. I'm finishing. Here is, here it is. Rater des mächtigen Gottes. And the last one, Buber and Rosenzweig. In, it's not 1985, it's 1924, but published only. Ratsmann des heldischen Gottes. Again, the same translation. So 3 times. Probably Buber knew, of course, Heinemann, but I don't think that Heinemann knew the Dutch guy. It's just 2 people thinking the same. I also thought so. So I suggested this would be now the translation, Counselor of the God. And the problem is, of course, that all this knowledge of German and this all went away with the JPS. And the moment the JPS appeared, no one read anymore these books, including the Lipa Bible, the English Lipa Bible, which also had Heinemann's translation. But then there was an authoritative translation to English, and with this came the end to this. No, one moment. All this idea, all this lecture, many years ago, Jonathan Bendov, my friend, and once, many years ago, we sat together, and he incited the whole thing of pele yoetz, one thing, and next, of course, Ronnie Goldstein, my dear friend, with whom I discuss, because I'm not a native biblicist, you know. And to you, thank you.
We have exactly 5-6 minutes for questions. That's please, Marvin.
Thank you for your paper with a very interesting perspective. I'm wondering if you could point to text that might show the king actually acting as a counselor for God, or perhaps an advocate for the kingdom, or advocate for the people of the kingdom. Maybe Hezekiah in Isaiah 37 asking God for help in a crisis.
Then the Assyrian kings, that we would have several such examples, where in distress, in great distress, the king alone, it's always all the enemies against him, and it's a multitude, and he alone turns to God for help.
Is it really a counselor's function?
No, I wouldn't say so. I wouldn't say. I think the Sargon piece, the old Assyrian piece. By the way, the Maliku amelu is a reference, goes back to old Assyrian times. I mean, these are all formulae which are very ancient. So I think this Kanish, old Assyrian, unique piece of literature, of old Assyrian literature, which has Sargon discussing matters with the gods, is an amazing title, which I don't know. Maybe that's the only. But there are so many things which we don't know of, you know. For example, the Tree of Life, so to say, it's in picture everywhere. We don't know anything about it. No text is written about it, not a word.
Kenneth.
Quick comment. Judges 7,
Right.
sorry, Judges 17 also uses Av as a counselor.
Very
This is
good.
just another text.
Very good, thank you.
I don't recall the writing of amelu in the Neo-Syrian text right off. Does it have an ending, or is it just logographic? Do you remember?
I look into it, okay?
Yeah. Well, it's just that it might be.
In a sec.
Oh,
I'll answer you later. He
Yeah,
says this.
Kenneth,
Yeah.
Israel.
Thank you. It is possible that you can start with the Hodayot scroll, because in the Hodayot scroll, the verse is quoted, pele yoetz in gvurato. And Flusser understood it in the same meanings that you have suggested, the counselor of good, the wondrous counselor of God. But I have serious doubts about this move. I believe that in Israel, in ancient Israel, there was, at least in some circles, a belief in the deification of gods and of kings. And would Jewish interpretation be right? I would expect to find here by craft more pele yoetz le'el gibor. Le'el gibor. The syntax should be le'el gibor if you're right. But no, we have a list here of 4 different names. Each of them should be taken differently. Pele yoetz, el gibor, avi ad, sar shalom. So, and Jeremiah 23, v'zeh shmo asher yikreo Adonai tzidkenu. So we have to, the difficulties are the same there, and the efforts to reduce it are there in Jeremiah 33. This is the name of the city and not of the king. We have to accept there is an intrinsic tension in Israelite religion between the wish to separate God from humanity and the ideological move to give the king elevated divine status. It's built-in the system.
Okay.
Take it. The time is up. I was just going to take the privilege of being the chair and saying, though we did discuss this many, many years ago, we discussed it, Elnathan, before I wrote something new on it. And in there we have building on what Nili had said before about this is the polemic of anti-Assyrian. We have the polemic also polemicizing of 2nd Isaiah, where in 40:13 you mentioned it as an aside. You did bring the referring to God, v'isha tzato yodienu, who is the one that is the counselor of God? Et mi noatz vayiveineu, who was the counselor that gave him some type of wisdom and insight? In other words, Isaiah here is polemicizing precisely against this, against the Maliku, but we also have Maliku Ili, and we also have the feminine. We have a Maliktu. Exactly, it's a Maliktu. So here we have an exact polemic against this, right? Against the Isaiah said there, if you accept the explanation that Elnathan has given, that there's a counselor of God, Isaiah is coming out precisely. It's nowhere else in the entire Bible. He said, no, God has no counselor whatsoever. In two verses of itself. So this, we don't have a Maliku, he says, right?
Which means that everyone believes that there is a Maliku.
So second Isaiah is polemicizing against proto-Isaiah, 1st Isaiah, which is marvelous. I want to thank you. Thank you.